All right, great. So I just want to still continue to check if you guys can hear me on both places, both online and on YouTube. So I wanted to start off by introducing myself. Hope everyone is able to hear me as clearly as possible. This is our first time doing this kind of system in which we are both live on YouTube and on Zoom as well. So the participants on Zoom can hopefully interact with us, ask us questions, and we will be keeping this a weekly kind of session as well. So I want to first of all invite everyone who's joining us. Thank you for joining us. Particularly, it's a good experience for me as well to share the stuff that is available in terms of the knowledge, in terms of the suggestions that have happened for me in my career, and to really help people develop themselves as particularly practitioners and therapists. I want to start off by giving a little bit of an introduction about myself in terms of what my journey has been, in terms of how I have come to this stage in which I am currently now a supervisor. I am a TRE trainer. I'm an NLP master practitioner. I'm an EMDR practitioner as well. I've had 10 years of experience working in the mental health field. And in the last 4 years, I've exclusively specialized working with trauma work. So there has been a lot of changes and growth and development in my own personal journey. But one of my main motivators for joining therapy or joining this pursuit in psychology was primarily for my own personal understanding of my own self. Right, I wanted to know more about myself. Right, I had my own history, my own childhoods, and my own experiences, and so when I came to this opportunity of or this experience of mental health, I was first a customer of myself. Right, I was a user of the product. I was a user of what therapy is, what therapy can do for someone, and that helped me become interested in actually doing it and learning it more. Right, so this journey kind of started for me 10 years ago. In that process, I've been more of a student as well myself, right? So being able to kind of really understand the nuances of what does it take to become a therapist. So my hope today is to be able to kind of really share with you guys three main things that I've been able to kind of, that's the start of any kind of journey, right? Because I do feel, okay, I have this assumption that if a therapist doesn't know how to regulate, they have a 10-year career, they have a 5-year career, right? Because it's going to take 5 years for them to completely kind of burn themselves out. Jiske wajah se, the first main thing I felt that I wanted to kind of talk about, and you guys can engage in the chat box and engage in the questions regarding whether you guys agree with this, disagree with this, what are your thought processes about this, is burnout, right? I wanted to start this journey with self-care, right? And I want to use both burnout and self-care as a same side to each coin. And I think it's important for us to really understand what these things are. So I've given you a little bit of an introduction about myself and a little bit of an understanding about why it's important to start with burnout and self-care. Because इसके आगे जो next 11 weeks हैं, उसमें हम लोग जो भी चीज़ें cover करेंगे, all of them are going to be based on how well can you take care of yourself. There will be things that will be coming up in this course of 11 weeks, which is a considerable amount of time, that will kind of challenge your own sense of self, because my intention is to provide value, right? Okay, what does it really take to actually create a difference? And in a client's life, and as a therapist, as a practitioner, or people who are actually earlier on in their careers, what can you actually do? What kind of information can actually benefit you today that you might be aware of and yet resisting, or actually be journeying and working towards and hopefully wanting to become the best practitioner that you can be. Okay, so before we kind of go any further, I do want to go on a little tangent. This training was supposed to happen on Friday, and we had kind of set up this time. And what happened was that on Friday, I got this news that my wife had just gone into labor, right? And so I was like, okay, so I have a training, right? And but my wife just went into labor, and I was like, I've got to stop everything, right? And I kind of rushed, and we just kind of went through our whole experience, and now we're here. And so I wanted to first of all apologize for any inconveniences or any kind of delays had kind of happened for people because of that. I just really wanted to make sure that I was being transparent about what was happening for me. And now on the flip side of things, I'm really hoping that we will be able to have a more regular sessions, which we've planned for in in every Friday, and hopefully in Ramzans it'll be like 2 to 4 as a natural timing for this. Okay. All right. So as we are talking about all of these different aspects of our work and career, we're gonna first of all start off by saying, like if I was to start my career today, what is the thing that I would like to know? What is the first thing that really kind of comes to my mind? you know um, we have three main sections of this training today. It's going to be primarily conversational, specifically for people in the chat box. If there are any questions that you guys have, I want to ask. I want to let you guys agree, disagree, have a conversation with me about this. Okay. If there was something I knew 10 years ago that I know now at the beginning of my therapy journey, what would that be exactly? What do I wish I had known? And this is the thing I want to tell everyone here today. First of all, you can only take a client where you have gone before. What does that mean? That means primarily that if you're starting and the journey to become a therapist today, you've got to a have some insight and self-awareness about who you are as a person. When I was doing my CPPD training, one of the main things that and at that time it was like around 8 years ago, and Lynn was the person who was training me at CPPD. And one of the first things that she had said was that this profession, there is a little bit of wounding in all of us, right? And that makes us wounded healers, people who have been on the journey themselves. And I related to it because, as I had mentioned before, my main reasons for starting this process was because I had been on this journey. And so people who sometimes get attracted to this field, they have their own experiences that they've gone through, and there is a strong desire to help others in an emotional and mental health kind of space. And so one of the main things that she had kind of quoted was the name wounded healers. And I really want to talk to all of those wounded healers, and that was something that I wish I had talked to myself 10 years ago, right? That you have to know why you are doing this, right? Why have you started to join this journey of becoming a therapist, right? And psychologist, clinical psychologist, because it is quite a difficult process. I believe that no other profession that we have requires this level of self awareness from the practitioner themselves. And I'll go into details about why and how does all of this create kind of burnout. So, as we're starting this journey, there is a little bit of wounding in all of us that creates this kind of desire to help others. If we have regulated or seen ourselves and have a little bit of understanding about, okay, the reason why, and I'll be very transparent about this, the reason why I wanted to become a therapist is because I did not want others to go through the same experiences I had gone through. And I had this desire to kind of help people, right? And I had this innate desire because I knew how hard it was or how painful it was. There was this desire to kind of help people. And that's the motivation of some people who are joining this profession, right? That there is this kind of passion or drive that is there to kind of really change or help people in kind of creating this kind of experience. So that's where it's one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is, and this is a joke, so I just want to say it as a joke. I did not get into my what do you call it? My medical program, right? I wanted to become a doctor. Because wasn't able to become a doctor, I actually shifted and became a psychologist. And so that's the second motivation that I've seen that kind of comes about as well. The third motivation is that, this is rare yet in psychology, but I just want to be transparent about it as well, is that sometimes it's I have a family. I have other people who have like, yeah, wanted to become a doctor, right? So I completely understand, and you'll be surprised on how many people take psychology as a step down for what do you call it? What do you call it? Doctors, right? So, for example, because मेरा MBBS में वो नहीं हुआ सही है, तो जिसकी वजह से मेरा psychology में degree हो रही है, right? And just want to say, with both those motivations, whether it's because it's my only option or whether it's because it's my passion and I want to be there, both of them have their own motivations associated with it and pitfalls associated with it. And that is one of the reasons why, when you're at the start of this journey, you have to really evaluate whether this is for you or not. right? And one of the main people that had changed my perspective about this was Dr. Robert from Arizona Trauma Institute. So we've been in mentorship with Dr. Robert from Arizona Trauma Institute, and he's very value aligned when it comes to working with people. Okay, working with anyone, not just trauma clients that we're trying to do at the center, but most of the people that you work with, you have to know what your own motivations are, because there is a what do you call it? I would call it a there is a wounding in the people that you're trying to help, and you do not want to be unaware of your own motivations, because that unconsciously can lead to some advantages. For example, if you have this intention or motivation unconsciously, not intentionally, but you're not aware of it, that I want to be valued or I want to be someone who helps people, and that is part of my narcissistic, and everyone has some narcissistic tendencies, but it's part of my esteem. It's part of the way I kind of value myself. It is the way I actually help myself feel better. And so what happens is that whenever there is someone who's wounded, who finds themselves in a place where of disempowerment, they want someone like that that can say, please take care of me, and have all the authority that you need of my life, so that I don't have to be the one that kind of goes through something. And those things can take place, which are called enactments. I know I might be going around in different places and having a little bit of kind of jumping as well, that's kind of taking place. But my intention is to really touch on some of the topics that we will be discussing in a lot more detail moving forward, right? When it comes to psychoanalysis, when it comes to all of these things. But at the start of this journey, know why you're doing it, right? Really understand that what is your true motivations behind it. And is there a sense of, I want to be the one that helps people. So I'm going to be the one that makes sure that none of my clients cry, or none of my clients are leaving the session unhappy, or there's always some kind of breakthrough taking place, and there's always some kind of motivation happening. And this is what it means to be a great therapist. And if that's the motivation, which was mine, and I fell in that category, I had to learn how to dial it down, right? I had to really learn how to be like, this is my needs, not the client's needs, right? And by not being aware of my needs and falling for my unconscious patterns of wanting to be there for people and help people and all of those things, I could inadvertently create more harm, right? And that will not benefit you as a person, and it will not benefit the client. So that was the adjustment that I had to go through, and I wish I had told myself something in that day. Or if you're in the camp, and we're keeping it simple with two camps primarily. If you're in the camp that I wanted to do MBBS and mujhe psychology degree mili, and that's sort of like what I had to settle with, then you will never put in the work to actually go through the pain of getting to know yourself. It is so painful. Self-awareness hurts a lot, right? Self-awareness hurts a lot, right? Because when you get to see and hear, really honestly notice yourself, okay, why is this, why am I wanting to help people, is because there's my own need or wounding that is causing me to help people. That pain, that awareness will create an emotional experience as well. Okay. And if you have felt KR, I wanted like something like a medical thing, which in which I wanted to kind of just help people and just be able to diagnose people and all of that stuff. And I'm in this thing in which I'm actually asked to kind of see myself. I'm not interested. Okay. In both of those experiences, awareness of your own self and the resistance to that awareness is what will create burnout. And that's initially what happens in the start. Okay. And my intention and my hope is that those people who are starting the journey today, I'm especially in Pakistan in particular, there is a lot of good resources available, not just because of online spaces that have resources such as YouTube, and like even great practitioners who are internationally available, that are showing you content about how they are doing therapy and how they're self-aware and what does it take to become self-aware. All of those things are one aspects of the journey. but you also have a great mental health culture forming locally as well, right? You have good organizations that have formed who are wanting to genuinely help people in a certain caliber, of maintaining ethical practice, of creating supervision, of making sure that the therapists are in their own personal journey as well. So really good organizations are working to create a more standardized approach, which I don't believe was available 10 years ago. And there's a variety of them out there that are doing the best from their own personal insights into what they think is the right way. And that's a good, really good step. So now there is this whole self accountability that has taken place, and thus, if there is ever a journey, if there is ever a time, if you want to get employed as a psychologist, if you want to get employed or have a name as a independent practitioner, even really start becoming self-aware and going through the discomforts of self-awareness. Okay, that's number one for sure. The second thing I wish I had, at the start of this journey, that I really hope that all of you guys get to really know from yourself, is that there is a difference between the brain and the body. Okay, and I want to be very honest. This comes a little bit. The language of this at least comes a little bit from my own experiences of trauma work, because in trauma work there's a lot more insights about the nervous system, and the mind, and the mind's impact on what happens when your mind gets like impact, what kind of thinking takes place when you're impacted by trauma, basically, right? And what happens is that for a lot of people, due to the nature of academics, or due to the nature, because when I was doing my psychology degree, there is a certain level of expectation you have towards passing an exam, making sure that all the information that you have is right, you don't make a mistake, and you don't create any kind of problems, right? Because the more you are academically sound, say, that's sort of like what is considered to be a trademark for knowledge and informed. However, and this is something I've learned from training therapists for the last 4 years, that there is a difference between book knowledge and actual practical experience, right? And there is a discomfort for a lot of people when they transition into the practical experiences, because what they have learned in kind of knowledge wise, mind wise, so it doesn't translate as effectively in body, right, or experientially. And thus it's very important that whenever you are in this kind of stage, you're really taking into account what takes place, जो मुझे cognitively सिखाया गया था. For example, and obviously tomorrow, or sorry, not tomorrow, but the next one that we're going to be doing this Friday is going to be about humanistic, right? And that's something that I believe is where we kind of start our journey. So if I was to kind of say, in humanistic therapy particularly, we start the journey on unconditional positive regard, congruence, and empathy, right? Like those are the three main things that we kind of talk about. वो textbook में बताया हुआ है कि in order to hold space for a client, in order to build a therapeutic alliance, the core main conditions are unconditional positive regard, congruence, right, and empathy. But what is it really when you're sitting in front of a person that you might not be liking, or it's because you had something else to do and someone else is making you sit in front of them? So how do you show unconditional positive regard, congruence, and empathy, right? Like, so how does that really work? So जो main differences हैं किताबों के और practical experiences के, that is what this whole therapist training program is kind of based on and designed on, right? इसका मकसद ही यही है कि जो आप लोग किताबों में सीख रहे हो, उसका प्रैक्टिकल एक्सपीरियंस क्या होता है, और अगर आप लोगों को ये प्रैक्टिकल एक्सपीरियंस एटलीस्ट इन सम वे पहले से पता चल जाए, राइट, कि अच्छा इसका प्रैक्टिकल एक्सपीरियंस जो है वो ये सब चीज़ें होती हैं, so that while you're on your journey, by the time you guys, or generally by the time people are in their practical experience, they have that understanding of what does it mean to actually do the work, right? Because whenever you have a client in front of you, they would not care कि आपने कितना किताबों को आपका एग्जाम में ग्रेड क्या आया था, right? Basically they would not care about that. What they care about is, can you be trusted, right? Can you maintain confidentiality, right? Are you someone who's gonna be honest with their work and the effort it takes to do that work, right? And those are the questions that are, I don't know what textbook it is, probably ethics, and I'm hoping a lot of people have read this ethics textbook जिसमें ये सब चीज़ें लिखी होती हैं, मगर इनका practical applications is something that I'm hoping that we'll get to explore together and see together. And I'm really hoping to kind of make sure that you guys feel engaged, or that these conversations do feel a little bit more relevant for you guys as well, right? Because usually when I'm doing these kind of trainings, I have an audience in front of me, or I have people who I can kind of see or engage off in terms of energies. But this time I'm really just kind of sharing, and I have the Zoom people as well with me. So so I'm really kind of just benefiting from their presence right now and just the engagement that's kind of coming in. But if you guys have any questions, also in particular about anything that we've talked about so far, I would request you guys to kind of just really share that as well. Okay. So, what we've covered so far is that self awareness is going to hurt and it's better to start soon than later. Okay. There is a difference between book knowledge and street, it's not, I was calling street experience, but I was going to call like actual practical learning experience. And it's important to kind of figure out how do you start becoming aware of that learning experience beforehand, right? So for example, the traditional method of getting to have practical experiences are internships, right? That's the traditional method of when someone's starting a career in therapy, what they will do, or generally any kind of field, what they would do is they would start internships. And internships have a very traditional um, mindset, right? Because two reasons. Number one, in psychology internships, either you are doing it at a university, and so at a university, because there's a huge number of people that are coming in, there's a different level of formal structure and confidentiality. If you're doing it at a private practice, someone who's a private practitioner, there's a different level of confidentiality that is maintained. And so interns are traditionally not invited, and this is from my experience, because ethically, technically, if you invite an intern into the session from a private practitioner, there is transferences that are going to be taking place, right? And you have to account for that. And if the client has given consent prior, great, amazing, right? If the client hasn't given consent prior, there is genuine risk of confidentiality, contamination, unsafety, and all of those elements. And thus, internships, in my experience, if they teach you how to kind of how a particular organization works, how some sessions work, how all of those things work, that's great. However, real experience will come when whatever books you're reading, you're applying them to yourself first. Okay. And that is one of the most important ways to really learn how it kind of feels like for someone else. For example, if I learned about humanistic psychology, and we're going to go into that in a lot more detail, like imagine if I learn about CBT, that my thoughts create shifts in behaviors, feelings, and emotions, right? Like if I think some way, it'll create an emotion for me, which will create impact my behavior, which impacts my situation. Okay, that's a very kind of one of the simple things that are tools that are used in CBT primarily. So now imagine that rather than you wanting to see a therapist do it on someone, which you can find on YouTube, and that's amazing, but you're like, नहीं मुझे आप देखूंगी तो like I देखूंगा तो मुझे एक idea आएगा इस चीज के बारे में. Do it on yourself, right? Okay, do it on yourself, right? Okay, if I think this way and I feel this way, and this is the behavior that comes for me, right? So in order for me to change my behavior, which could be about, for me, it could be about like uh, managing my time better, right? Then what kind of thinking I need to have in order to get what kind of feelings going on, so that what kind of behaviors can kind of take place, and see if that change works, right? And what you would notice is a lot of people they don't want to do that work, and this is something I've experienced, and that could be my bias. And if you guys have experienced specifically the online the Zoom parts of it, if you guys have experienced it differently, let me know. Not a lot of people want to be the change they want to make in other people, Okay, they wanna be there to help others. However, for a lot of practitioners, what I've seen is that the work starts with the other rather than the self. And what happens is that आपका अपना जो मिसट्रस्ट है, वनरेबिलिटी इश्यूज है, इंटीमेसी इश्यूज है, आपका जो अपना सेकेंडरी बेनिफिट्स होते हैं फ्रॉम रेजिस्टेंस टू चेंज, राइट, वो सारी चीज़ें जो है ना वो इट्स अनकंफर्टेबल टू एड्रेस बेसिकली, राइट, इट्स नॉट दैट नाइस. एंड सो इट what happens is I want to learn and do all of this work so I can change you, not me. No, no, right? I want to change you, right? Because not that I'm like solid and sorted and all of that. Yeah, yeah, sure, absolutely. There is a little bit of compensatory behavior, yes, but more than just the compensatory nature of it, there is not denial, but you can call it pain avoidance, right? There is a very strong pain avoidance to changing yourself. And what happens for a lot of practitioners is that because of the nature of the work, there is a very strong power dynamic, right? Because for a lot of people, the therapist is the authority in the field, right? They know what they're supposed to kind of know, right? मुझे पता है कि आपका disorder ये है, आपको disadvantages ये हैं, आपको fix करने के लिए मुझे ये करना होगा. And that what it does is, for anyone who is suffering from a mental illness, or for anyone who is suffering from any kind of wounding, right, that power dynamic creates a maintenance of the status quo, right? Because मैं wounded हूँ, आपको सब पता है, आप मुझे बताओगे, even अगर आप मुझे बता दोगे, then what it does is it makes I make sure that I am not like, can I even do it on my own, or will I always require you to be there to help me, right? So all of these different, and those are stuff that we'll cover in transferences and counter transferences. We'll cover all of those things in detail. But what happens is that when you are not willing or wanting to see the change you have to be in order to create the change for someone else, what happens is you might not know congruently, right? Congruently, what it takes to go through something like grief, or what it takes to actually make that difference. And that is why what it actually takes to create congruence and unconditional positive regard and insights, and move away from that kind of that book knowledge to actual experiential knowledge, is not just watching videos or observing other people, is to really kind of go into, okay, will I do it? Would I have done it? Like, do I think I need to kind of go through my grief process? Okay, and if I read a book on it, will I do the things that this book has asked me to do? Right? And what you will see is that there will be resistance that will come in, right? And those resistances are what will actually create challenges, burnout, right? Because there is a part of you that is self-aware and it does know that this is something that you yourself might be struggling with as well. So how can you be congruent and create unconditional positive regard if that's something that you haven't gone yourself, right? And so that's a very common um, uh, point of burnout specifically that also kind of comes in for people, right? And as you can see with the themes that are kind of being covered so far, in both elements, whether it is self-awareness journey and the natural insights that creates, or the difference between mind and body, and just kind of being able to personalize most of the stuff that kind of are being learned or taught. Because in my opinion, and I'm a fan of the field, and I want to be very honest, right? Like, I'm a student of the field. I love psychology as a subject. I love being able to be self-aware and having those things, because I don't think there's any other, probably medicine, but any other field that is so practically usable in just generally day-to-day life than this one, in my opinion. And I also think that when you do all of this work, because no one's perfect, right? And everyone is on this journey of becoming self-aware and self-actualizing and becoming a little bit better. When you actually go through this work for yourself, there is changes that you see in your life, right? And that changes, hopefully, are some things that are actually visible to others also, right? You're creating safety not just within your own self, but also hopefully for others around you as well, right? And family particularly, or friends, or people that you care for or work with, and all of those elements. So that is something that does make it worthwhile, because that's a dopamine hit, it's a feedback loop that takes place. However, there is definitely delayed gratification. It doesn't happen on the spot, right? It takes a lot of like, why am I doing this, and is it even worth it, and do I really want to be like self-aware and congruent and genuine enough? Do I really want to see why? What are the reasons why I want to avoid taking on clients who are male older men or female children? Do I really want to become aware of that answer within myself so that I can help those people? Mm, you know, so those are some of the challenges that I've seen that happen in the field, and I hope that when we're talking about at the beginning of the career, this is something that I kind of wanted to really invite you guys to start investing in. One other thing that Dr. Robert is quite clear about as well is that this is a very self-funded field, because trainings आप छोड़ दो, सही है, university तो चलो is another issue when it comes to payments. You have to pay for your therapy, you have to pay for your supervision, राइट? उसके ऊपर अगर आप कोई चीज पे करते हो एज एन एडिशनल resource for yourself, as like a training, that's separate, right? Internationally, Pakistan mein, let's like Pakistan mein, there is a licensing issue, right? What does that mean? Like, what does it mean to have a licensing issue? What it means is that your therapeutic practice has no check and balances other than your own personal accountability, राइट? अगर आपको लगता है कि आप एथिकल काम कर रहे हो, सही है, चाहे वो असली में एथिकल काम हो या ना हो, it doesn't matter, right? It could the reason why potential reason why that you would have clients coming in regularly for you is because they could be feeling better due to the mechanism of oxytocin and serotonin that gets released when you have someone who's safe and you get to talk to them. So they could be feeling better consistently, not getting better, right? And you can continue to do that practice regardless. However, what happens is that because there is no active supervisory process here, your license does not depend on कि वो benefit दे रहा है या नहीं दे रहा. Okay. So what does that really imply? What that means is that you need to be aware okay, what are the values that you are bringing to your practice, okay, and there are lots of them to choose from, right? So what that means is that so I follow something which is called a trauma informed practice. What that means is that I am non-pathogenic, so I don't work with diagnosis. I work with regulating the body first before taking history, and then once their body and nervous system has regulated, that means that they have the capacity to see and hold space for their emotions. Then we go to the emotions to help the body release and kind of learn whatever it needs to learn. That's what the trauma informed process kind of looks like. Number one, right? Now, a lot of people work from a different kind of mindset, right? Some people are pathogenic, so they look at the DSM, and they look for the diagnosis, and that's what helps them, and that is what helps create certainty for them, and also helps create certainty for the clients. I'm not here to propose any kind of modality particularly. I'm just trying to say whatever modality or framework or practice that you're choosing, show results. Simple. Just show your results, right? Like अगर आपके काम के तरीके से client बेहतर हो रहा है, awesome, great, right? That's all. You client better hone ka matlab they're living a free, more alive, more like more less afraid, less shame, whatever their result orientation is. If you're delivering that in a reasonable amount of time, solid. I'm a fan of yours, right? And this is amazing work that you're doing. right? And I'm sure that in order for you to do all of that work, you must have taken your therapy, right? Because whatever the clients would have triggered in you, you would have taken care of that, and you would have had supervision ताकि आपके जो therapeutic blind spots हैं उनको भी वो देख सके. And sadly, you would have paid for both of them, right? So those are, and what happens internationally is that there are a certain number of licensed supervised hours and trainings that are required to maintain your licensing. उसी वजह से थेरेपिस्ट की अपकीप हो रही होती है. यानी कि बाहर क्या होता है कि आपको 1500 घंटे करने होते हैं, 1500 आवर्स होते हैं इन ऑर्डर टू बिकम फ्रॉम एसोसिएट clinical psychologist to clinical psychologist. So you remove the associate in 1500 hours. All of those things in that time of association, you cannot start your own clinical private practice. You are under supervision of someone else. And what that whole mechanism does is that it makes sure कि आपकी apprenticeship sort of आपकी अच्छी training हो रही होती है. जब आपका clinical associate clinical practice शुरू हो जाता है, तो आप अपना private practice भी शुरू कर सकते हो, आप आपका अपना supervision license का hours भी complete कर सकते हो, and all of those elements take place. Pakistan, none of that available, right? So really requesting everyone to kind of create your own standards of practices, right? And everyone can have their own. Just make sure that whatever your standard of practice is, you're maintaining it. Consistency is better than not doing anything, right? So for example, sometimes I recommend therapists, you don't need to go to therapy all the time. Just make sure you're going when there's something happening for you, राइट? अगर आपकी ज़िंदगी में कोई परेशानी उस वक्त चल रही है, सही है, जो आएगी, लाइफ सक्स एंड इट हैज़ अप्स एंड डाउन्स, एब्स एंड फ्लोज. अगर आपकी ज़िंदगी में कोई भी परेशानी हो रही है, सो गो फॉर इट, go for a session, right? Like have some work done regarding some current challenge that's taking place in your life, and as soon as that work is complete, that's it, end therapy. That's all you need, right? If you feel like your practice hasn't developed that much and you don't have enough clients to fund or supervise someone, or you're not charging enough or any of those elements, go for supervision once a month, right? Or you go for supervision 3 times a month. Make sure that, and I don't know how, I'm scared of saying things controversially as well, right? That's a challenge here. Make sure that your supervisor is giving you one-on-one time, right? So that they don't have any other distractions taking place because you've bought that time from them. Similar to how a session takes place, the client has bought your time from you, and thus you can't have your phone and you can't have your other masles in it, right? And you need to find the space for that, right? So those are elements that are kind of taking place. It's a very good question that came from the chat, is where can you find supervisors? Okay. And again, I'm being very mindful of my languaging because many different forms of supervisions take place. I know कि एक thesis supervisor होता है जो university का होता है, and for a lot of people sometimes what happens is that जो उनके thesis supervisors होते हैं वो उन्हीं से continue कर देते हैं. Sure, no problem, as long as that relationship has changed from student teacher to actually therapist and supervisor, and that you're paying for your supervision as well, और उसके जो एक certain boundaries होते हैं supervision के वो maintain हो रहे हैं. Sure, I'm hoping that some practitioners can kind of go into it. For me, what I did was that I did the CPPD supervision process, and that's something that trained me to actually do supervision, and supervision has its own certain elements in it. सो आई नो कि जो आपके ह्यूमनिस्टिक लेवल्स होते हैं उसमें जो है उसमें भी जो है वो सुपरवाइजर्स कर सकते हैं. Level 6 or level 7 second therapists can be supervisors for us. Yes, anyone. I don't know if it's which level it is, but whoever is calling themselves a supervisor and has completed their degrees, even if they're coming from a humanistic or counseling background, and so what they have is that they might not have expertise in creating pathology, so they might not have expertise in that. So agar aapka kaam as a psychologist is purely diagnostic in nature, so I can understand why that they might not be the right supervisor for you. However, if your work is counseling in nature, that means that you have sure an element for counseling and you have an element for pathology. So I highly suggest having those counselors as your counseling supervisors. ताकि जो transference, counter transference, case conceptualization हो गया आपका, clinical practice, आपका approach, anything वो आपको help कर सकें. Plus, in my experience, they're a little bit more aware of the supervision structure and its elements that are there. क्योंकि उनकी एक अलग से hopefully मुझे हर aspect का नहीं पता, but अलग से training होती है supervision की. And बहुत सारे लोग अब supervisors बन रहे हैं, right? And similar to your field of finding the right therapist for yourself, find the right supervisor for yourself, because this field is growing quite fast. A lot of people are becoming trauma informed, or a lot of people are becoming IFS trainers or somatic trainers, EMDR practitioners, just general TA also, transactional analysis also. So just find a supervisor that you vibe with, right? You don't need to have all of these different degrees and certifications, additional added on. I don't think those things are important. Your basic humanistic core conditional elements, empathy, unconditional positive regard, congruence, and your supervisor understands your specific desires, needs in our developmental stuff, find it, man. But again, it's only going to be your ethics that's going to make you work for it, right? Because even if you don't find it, and even if you continue to practice, there's going to be like no one's going to know, right? अगर आप मतलब अपना side money है हासिल करने के लिए 3 clients ले रहे हैं, सही है, और आपको अब क्या एक अलग से पर्सनल लाइफ है, दूसरी दुनिया है, दूसरी जिंदगी है, तो even if you don't take supervision, no one's going to stop you, right? And that's where it really kind of gets challenging. They're more into therapy in closed rooms, right? Yes, for sure. There is a certain kind of boundaries and elements and structure that's associated with kind of the supervision aspect of it. So yes, so when it comes to counselors and psychotherapists and all of these different elements in it, there are certain kind of structures to it, which again, my invitation is, if you're in this field, खुद से बहुत मेहनत करनी पड़ती है, right? And those are the main reasons why I went to Arizona and Dr. Robert to actually help me कि यार मुझे अगर trauma informed center बनाना है यहाँ पे, तो आपने कैसे बनाया था? क्योंकि I have no idea how to do this stuff, right? Because यहाँ पे I won't call it सेठिया, but like यहाँ पे बहुत अपने किस्म के काम होते हैं, right? And I'm sure कि obviously we're still developing and we're still kind of figuring out how to do it, but I know what the roadmap is. Everyone at the center and the team knows what the roadmap is. Now we just need to get there, right? And we're just going to learn and get better and get better and get better, and eventually we're going to hopefully get there, right? And that's the request that I have for all of you guys also. If you know what an ethical practitioner or someone that you want to look for be like, go for it, be like that. I remember one of the earliest things I started to do was I started to create these kind of models. In NLP में ये बहुत होता है कि models of excellence बनते हैं आपके. So what I did was I started, the first therapy book I read was John Bradshaw's Healing the Shame that Binds Us. And Healing the Shame That Binds Us is the first book which was about shame and about intergenerational shame in the family and how the person hides those shames. And those are the things that keep us in the toxic family structures, because we're hiding shames and we're embodying roles. It was an amazing book, and I was like, wow, yeah, like it was such a book because it tick marked all the things. It was relevant to me. I needed to understand it on a personal level as well. It helped me feel a little bit more uncomfortable, but I figured out कि मुझे इस तरह का therapist बनना है जिसकी इस तरह की सोच हो, right? And then I started to look more about his videos and how he trained and how he worked and all of those elements, and then you get to really have a roadmap कि अच्छा यार इस तरह ये काम होता है, उसने ये सब चीजें की थी यहाँ तक पहुँचने के लिए, तो मुझे भी इस तरह का ही कुछ करना होगा, right? Otherwise, I'm feeling quite confident if I think I can get there without those elements, right? So those were some of the things that kind of kicks in. So that's the point that kind of takes place. All right. I know that I'm still in the stage of talking about the beginning of the therapy journey. But I'm really hoping that as we're having these conversations, a few things kind of start to emerge. Number one, this in the start, this field is going to cost you more money than it's going to give you. Number two, it's going to actually like create emotional discomfort for you like anything else. Nothing else in my life could have been this hard. My family comes from a if you have an electronics business, right? So furthest thing away from therapy and mental health and all of those things, and nothing could have prepared me for like how painful and how hard this work is. It's amazingly hard. The amount of personal experiences you're going to go through, it's really hard, right? Worth it at the end? Sure, yes. Would not do anything else in my world, in my life, than this for sure. Painful? 100%. Like, not for everyone, right? And I've seen enough people and trained enough people that when they get to really see the change that is required, they're like, family business better. I can just go and do electronics, right? And that's fine. That's better. It's not bad that this field particularly has a self-cleaning process. Otherwise, and one of the main reasons why it has a self-cleaning process is that if you don't do these things, and if you don't take all of these kind of safety measures, which means that you are not in the journey of self-awareness, right? Or the going through the pains of self-awareness, or you're like, I don't need a supervisor, or you're like, I don't need therapy, or you're like, यार मैं अपने जो supervision का काम है वो मैं अपने जो मेरी स्कूल और यूनिवर्सिटी में या जो मेरे जानने वाले लोग हैं उनसे मैं peer supervision के थ्रू मैं काम कर लूंगा, पूछ लूंगा. If you're going into it from those kind of elements, right, guess what's going to happen? You're going to get burnt out. Like, I'm talking like burnt, burnt out, right? And there is this thing, because even this happens for anyone in the service industry, right? Anyone who is helping people. There is this concept called compassion fatigue, right? And this happens a lot for people who are in the service providers, right? And so for example, what is this process, right? Like, okay, so आपने आपका मकसद है शुरू में अपनी जर्नी को अपनी जर्नी पे पर्सनलाइज करना, अपनी जर्नी को to become the best therapist you can be. You're never going to become someone else's type of therapist, right? But you're going to be your best therapist, which is going to resonate with people because of your congruency, unconditional positive regards, and empathy towards yourself first, right? Because you're offering these conditions towards yourself first, you're going to be the best version of yourself in front of your clients. And that is going to help. Okay. Until then, there is this concept of compassion fatigue. What that means is that when we are there's this concept कि हमारे brain के अंदर mirror neurons होते हैं, right? And human beings are designed to be tribal in nature. So what that allows us to do is allows us to have empathy for other people. So, for example, what that means is that if I go to a funeral, even if I don't know the person, however the vibe of the people or the people around us is sad, what happens is that I pick up from my environment because I have mirror neurons and I have a certain radar that is designed to do that. Because awareness of my environment is how I keep myself safe. And so, if there is sadness in my environment, in order for me to conform, in order for my body to actually adapt, I will start feeling sad also. Okay, it's just natural. It's the way my body is kind of designed. There's a natural sense of empathy in that. However, if my own personal relationship with sadness is not there, and I numb myself, right, and I kind of, what happens is that my body will feel like it is under threat. And so what happens is that when I see other people going through tough things, right, which is domestic abuse, general abuse, emotional violence, generally violence, news, any kind of stress, and I'm trying to avoid the word trauma here, because sustained stress is traumatic, but in order to just keep things quite clear, if I notice stresses that are happening, people in Palestine, people in Karachi, overall, ghar ke masle, if I'm noticing stress that's consistently happening, what happens is my body, in order to know and in order to recognize all these experiences, it starts to feel, जिसको vicarious trauma भी बोलते हैं, and vicarious trauma का upgraded नाम है compassion fatigue, right? And what happens is that we all in this particular field will feel a lot of compassion fatigue because we're bombarded with experiences that other people have gone through, and there is a consistent impact that has on our body. Okay, not all the experiences that my clients are showing me, that the world is showing me, is something that I have been prepared for, right? Like for example, if I hear on the news that my someone's father kind of passed away, and then just giving you an example, right? I'm just giving you an example here, right? If someone shows me in the news that I have actually someone's father passed away, okay, and now what happens is that I have a relationship with my father. Okay. And obviously my mirror neurons are clicking, and my body is, my unconscious body is picking up and relating to that information, that will I be safe? Will I be okay? Right? So am I okay? And so what happens is my body, even if I'm not consciously aware of it, starts to do the work. It starts going into process, unconscious mind. There's sadness that comes up, there's empathy that is there extended to that situation, there's a sense of fear that takes place, my mind starts to become active, my body really starts to kick into gear. All of that work that my body is doing, because I have someone else who has gone through a stressful experience, the work that my body does is exhausting, right? All of these different elements that my body is doing in order to take care of my own life experiences in relation to that other person's life experiences creates fatigue, right? It's also called vicarious trauma because what happens is that sometimes, in order to prep my body for someone else's experiences, my body will go into survival. So my body will go into fight, flight, or freeze, right? And what you will start noticing in this particular field is that people who are practitioners, what happens for them particularly is that they have to really see how is their body responding to with what they have, what they're hearing, or what the other person has gone through and what they're seeing, right? And this fight response could be avoidance, it could be anger, right? Fight or freeze, bebasi, like feeling collapsed. And there's a whole spectrum that we will cover in the future sessions about what exactly are those, how do they take place, how does the body kind of decide what to go into, when to go into. We have like 11 weeks of these kind of trainings that we're going to go into with all of the stuff kind of coming in. Okay. So burnout, vicarious trauma is the updated version of compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue has to do with a lot more about what is the toll that it's taking on my body. There is a lot of stuff that is taking place. Some of it could actually be in relation to my own history as well. So, for example, for me, when I hear someone like a child pass away or something around those lines, there is experiences that are coming from my own experiences that you go like, this is something that is very difficult for me. In order for me to actually go through this, support someone else going through this, it's going to take up a lot more energy. If I'm not aware of that energetic cost, I'm going to exhaust myself. Okay. That's one of the main reasons why at the center we don't take more than 4 clients a day, right? Because our intention is to develop a sense of congruence level of practice. I know practitioners, and there have been practitioners who are able to quite regulate themselves, and they're able to hit like 5 sessions a day. I know internationally 5 sessions भी एक certain requirement होती है, कुछ जगहों पे 6 है, but can you imagine if you're doing congruent work with empathy and unconditional positive regard? And and by naming these things, I'm just saying the basics. This work takes a toll on you, right? And in order for you to be fully present and not dissociated and not disconnected and not just in your head and not just आपको मैं सही कर दूंगा और आपका मसला है and all of those things, and not from that mindset, if you're going to work, this field requires you to have an immense amount of self-care. like immense, right? And agar aapke patterns nahi bane hue, start today, man. Like the reason why I felt that in order for us to really understand the therapist training program, the 11 weeks that are going to be coming ahead, all of that stuff, the first step that has to go into it is self-care by miles, right? And I'll share you what my self-care routine is, and I know that there are other people as well, and hand raised, it is not because I want to self-care, right? I don't want a self-care, man. Like I just need to do it in order to maintain my own practice. Yeah, is there a question I want to ask? That, yeah. Yeah, man, like proper, right? So it's all, yeah, yeah, it is a win-win situation if that's the mindset, right? If that's the mindset, right? Because बाद में जाके मुझे समझ आया कि oh, doing all of this self care actually does benefit me, and I'm actually more present for my family, and I don't feel moody and grumpy and exhausted, and I don't feel like I've got the whole world on my shoulders and all of those things. Sure, lekin tell that to the guy that started doing this practice and wanted to kind of help people, right? And tell that to the guy that was like, I'm going to be consistently helping people and non-stop, and that guy, you tell that guy to be self-caring, he's going to be like, please, last thing I want to do is focus on me. I want to focus on other people, right? So easier said than done. Much easier said than done. Like, I'll be very honest, it is, I think for me, we use the word regulation a lot in the center, and it's grown and it's changed, and a lot of people find their own ways of self-regulating and all of those things. However, it's like, it's really difficult to change any habit, really difficult, not just because you understand the value of something, that's a different thing, but the muscle memory that is required to change a habit, that is a different balance on its own. Like I remember, and I know I'm going on a tangent here, right? But I remember like my first, when I was first reading up on this, I read like Robin Sharma's like 5 a.m. Club, right? And I was fully in my training at that time and practicing to become a therapist and all of those things. And I was like, okay, Robin Sharma says 5 a.m. Club, आप सुबह 1 घंटे पहले उठो, like 5 बजे उठो, सही है, और 5 बजे उठ के आप जो है वो एक्सरसाइज करो और मेडिटेशन करो और आप अपना ग्रेटिट्यूड जर्नल लिखो. And I was like, ये करना होगा मुझे. This is what I need to do in order to actually become a good therapist. And I was like, and did not happen. It did not happen. Like I was generally an early riser. I could not shift from like 8 baje se 7 baje tak. Like on a consistent basis. I could not. My brain and my body had some muscle memory involved in it that was like, you're used to waking up at 8. It will not feel as if you've completed your sleep until you wake up at 8. And I was like, so it's really difficult, the ask of self-caring. However, if you don't, and in this whole conversation in the next hour, we're going to go into that aspect of what are self-care aspects of it. But if you don't see the value of it, um, preemptively, like pehle se, what will happen is that when you do burn out, your mind is not going to recognize it as burnout, and you're going to give it other reasons. And one of my favorite ones is like, and now I think burnout ka language aa gaya, so that might not be the case. But for a lot of people, what they think is that if they take a break from the situation, that's what's going to help stop the burnout. Uh-uh, right? Burnout, right, is an internal process, right? And so the reason why self-care is important, which means identifying and doing process and actually being able to care for the emotions that are required. And sure, a leave can be part of that self-care journey, but without really identifying. And what Arizona talks about, primarily Arizona Trauma Institute, what it talks about is burning in, right? Without burning in, that what part of me is getting activated because of the work that I'm doing, without burning in, you will never be able to identify what is burning you out, right? And that's something that we have to kind of really take important in kind of knowing, because we have this kind of conventional mindset that says that removing yourself from the environment does create certain safety and actually creates a space for you. For sure, it'll help you regulate yourself 100%. However, when you put yourself back into that environment, because the activator or the stressor that was creating that burnout has not been identified or has not been changed, what happens is that it does create that exhaustion, right? It does create that sense of frustration and irritation. And so, when every time you come back from a vacation, it's not long until you start burning out again, right? And so that's a consistent kind of change that kind of takes place primarily. So those are some of the elements that are associated with burning out particularly. We've talked about the compassion fatigue element of it. It is a huge aspect of the work that we do, and there's a whole nervous system associated with how our body preps ourselves from the noises that we're hearing, and that kind of takes place. And one of the main things is that if we don't understand or identify what those noises are that are activating us, we will burn out. Acha, burnout ke andar, it's not just the physical toll that it starts to take, right? So burnout is not just, there's also other signs of burnout that takes place. Physical exhaustion is one, emotional exhaustion is another one, spiritual exhaustion is another one. So आपका physical exhaustion के अंदर fatigue, not wanting to work, not wanting to have time, really feeling not in the mood. Emotional exhaustion के अंदर feeling like you don't have the capacity to have fun, right? कि ऐसा लगता है कि you're in a rut and you're consistently in the cycle of things that you have to kind of cover and uncover, and those are the second one. The third one is spiritual exhaustion. Spiritual exhaustion is, and this is in association with developmental immaturity and Pia Melody's work that's done. Spiritual exhaustion has to do with trust, right? So spiritual has little to do with religion, more to do with trust. And trust के तीन elements होते हैं. Trust के अंदर सबसे पहला आता है trust in God, which can be God, any kind of religious aspect of it, higher, something greater than yourself, right? That you're not God, that there is another God element, right? So trust in God, trust in others, right? कि लोग मुझे मारेंगे तो नहीं. Do I trust the people around me? Do I trust that can other people in my workplace, in my family actually be trusted, right? And trust in self. Can I do this? Do I have the capacity to do this? So all those elements, right? So all those elements are what are involved in burnout particularly. So fatigue, physical fatigue, emotional fatigue, spiritual fatigue, relational fatigue is also something that kind of comes in, right? I don't want to meet people, I don't want to. So you can see there's a certain kind of like your light in the light inside of you starts to go dim, right? You start feeling exhausted, you start feeling overwhelmed, you start feeling challenged, you start feeling burnt, right? And so this is something that is a very common aspect of the work, and that could be because of expectations from your others around you, from yourself, from your work. That's one aspect of it. Of not being able to get good rest, right? I just had a child, right? So there's no way I'm getting good rest for like the next few months. So I know that in order for my self-care to kind of go up, sleep's going to be a huge chapter for me. So one of the main things I'm going to do is I'm going to have like high levels of sleep, right? So that's the second one that kind of kicks in, right? Or we have the third one, which is all going to be about like आपका physical हो गया, आपका emotional हो गया, so आपके friends, social network. That's something that's very important as well. Places that you can go to that you feel safe in, right? So all of those elements are required. And lastly is also intellectual engagement, right? Like you need a place where you can actually engage with yourself on an intellectual level also, and those elements also kind of are required to have more of a social kind of experience, or have more of a capacity to kind of avoid burnout. Okay, so as we're getting to understand burnout, as we're getting to understand compassion fatigue, as we're understanding the importance of self-awareness in this particular work, there are certain elements that I wanted to really kind of give in terms of what does it take to maintain this concept of burnout, right? अगर आपके आंखों के सामने ये बर्नआउट की अवेयरनेस नहीं होगी, what will happen is that your own personal challenges, resistances, avoidances will be blamed onto others. For example, I find it difficult to work with elder men when I was starting my therapy work, right? Because of my own personal experiences, when it came to elder men, I would I would not be able to work, right? Now what happens is, imagine it's not my client. Imagine if it's someone I'm working with. I'd imagine if it's someone I'm kind of helping, or it's a peer of mine, it's something that someone who I'm kind of involved in. What will happen is that if I am not involved in my understanding, कि अच्छा यार, what's happening right now for me is the reason why I'm having difficulty going to this workplace is because there's a person there that really is activating me, right? And because I have to work with that person consistently, I am feeling burnt out, right? Now what happens is the easiest thing for my mind to do is blame, right? Why? Because my mind's job is problem solving, right? What that means is that मेरे दिमाग का काम ही मसलों को solve करना है, and thus me in pain, person cause pain, person the problem. Simple, right? Is the simplest math I have. And what happens is that when that simple math takes place and that other person is actively the problem, what happens for me is, in order for me to manage my burnout, I go into changing them. Not possible, right? And I want to be very honest, it's absolutely not possible. Like, my burnout has very little to do with, or if it depends on them changing, oh my god, never gonna happen. Super exhausting. You can try as much as you want, it's not gonna work, right? Your burnout, if you want to manage it, then you will have to recognize that there is power in you changing yourself rather than desiring to change the other person, right? It is the most important thing to kind of see when it comes to burnout management, because when it is the easiest thing to do is identify the causes. Can be, if you're on this journey, identifying the causes of the burnout could be very easy, right? And it's something that people do a lot, right? कि यार आपकी वजह से आपका expect, and again, it, there is a process to this, and there's a certain level of sensitivity in it, and those are all things that you have to kind of be very mindful for, because the idea is not that if you're in an unsafe environment you should stay in an unsafe environment. That's not the case, right? If you have to be able to protect yourself and have your boundaries set and all of those things. But I'm talking about more of from a place of, okay, you've done all of that work, right? You have clean and clear and set those boundaries in place, and it's not, and when you're evaluating, you're recognizing, and other people are giving you this information, that this, yes, there are flaws, and there are flaws, and in order for me to really make that change consistent, there is more power, from my experience, and this is only something that I can share, in you changing your own awareness, right? Okay, this is where this comes from. Okay, is that person the same as this? Okay, if that person isn't the same as this, what are some of the differences? Okay, what are the things that I am going to ask and I'm going to actually reflect back on? And what are some of the things that are coming from my own past that is creating this fatigue in me? And can I work on that for myself also? Okay, that process is very important, right? Because if you go into changing other people for managing your own burnout, the effectiveness of that, or the chances of that, or the power in that is very limited. And this is something that you might sometimes notice and see in your own clinical practice as well, that when people are actually wanting to work on resentments and anger and creating safety within their space, there is a focus on the external, right? And there has to be an identification of that, and it's important for there to be an identification of that. However, the chances of the other person changing are sometimes not in your full control. They can be in your influence, but they can't be in your control. In order for your own burnout to be managed, it's important for you to recognize your own power, right? And your own power in any situation is your own sense of thinking and your own sense of self and your own sense of awareness. Okay, is this something that I have gone through before? And if this is something I have gone through before, is the intensity in this situation part of that, or is it separate from it? And when we will be doing psychodynamic, primarily psychoanalysis and all of those things, this is the stuff that we will be working on in a lot more detail in terms of how do we identify these things, what are some of the things that come up as challenges, secondary gains, all of those things. Because what happens is that if I am the therapist and I'm the practitioner, if I have a client that's trying to, it burns me out because one of the things that happens working with her is that they activate some of the stuff that I don't like or some of the habits that I don't like. Then what happens is that I can't change that client. Plus, I don't think I'll be the right therapist to working with that client also. The easiest thing to do would be bhej do. But that's not the ethical thing to do. The ethical thing to do is me figuring out from supervision and therapy and my own personal work what about that client is really kind of activating me so much, right? And is that something that's coming from my own past? And if it is something that's coming from my own past, is that the client's doing? Right? And can I create that separation? And from what my experience has been, that as soon as someone goes into that process and they actually start creating that change for themselves, and they actually start to create that shift between their present and their past, their body recognizes it as well. And thus, the intensity of the burnout goes away. Not goes away, reduces, right? And that is something that is very important also, because what you will notice is that there's always another onion layer to peel. It never ends, right? The process never ends. And so, when you're in this journey of cleaning up transferences, cleaning up burnouts and compassion fatigues, and having a good self care routine, and being able to change through the muscle memory of what it actually takes to maintain and sustain a good habit, what happens is that sometimes you do want to sometimes you do want to also have this button of pausing process, right? It's sometimes also very important that you're actually able to pause the non-stop mind that is working, right? क्योंकि आपका generally दिमाग self awareness, self insight, personal awareness, personal insight, personal development चल रहा होता है, right? कि अच्छा ये किस वजह से क्या behavior क्या reason है, because that's the job of ours. Our job as therapists is to see people, help people, be able to kind of understand what is creating that behavior, what is the thinking, all of those elements that are there. And so there's consistently work that is taking place in the mind, right? And so sometimes, in order for us to manage our own professional burnout, it is important for us to have something physical that we work with, something that can take us away from our mind. And I don't know why this doesn't get talked about as well, but in order to do sustainable therapeutic work, we need to have, in my opinion, a physical hobby. So I have jiu-jitsu. This is something that I've been doing for like 6 7 years now. Gym as well is a good option. Running is a good option. Something that is physical, that takes away from the energy in the mind and gives it to the body. um, and it has to, and I feel like it has to be enough that it can actually match the intensity also. For example, if I'm not someone who's doing all of that intense self-awareness work, then I don't need something which is going to be super intense as well. I can just go for a run, have fun, be able to kind of take physical action for it. Being able to sit on the chair, that also creates a lot of fatigue as well, right? Because we have a technically a desk job, right? And if you're taking 4 hours of sessions and you're in the chair for 4 hours consistently, that's going to do a number on your back and your hamstrings. So it's actually very important to be able to kind of figure this stuff out, sort these things out, and have a routine and plan. Okay. So okay, so as we're talking about all of these different elements, right, in terms of burnout, in terms of compassion fatigue, in terms of all of this, the challenges that sometimes come up is also in regards to um, how do we kind of manage all of those things, right? Like, for example, I was just checking on the messages that are there on the YouTube as well, right? I want to give a little bit of a journey about like the self care that I do, right? Like just to give you guys an insight about some self care tools that have been beneficial for people, some that haven't, and the most controversial one, breathing. I want to give a little bit of like, can actually like breathing help as well in terms of what do you call it, in terms of burnout management and in terms of compassion fatigue management as like a regulation tool. So, you know, before, one of the things that Dr. Robert also was very clear about is that gotta have 15 regulation tools, right? And I was like, yeah, regulation tools, what do you mean by that, right? Like, and the mind, in my mind, the first thing I thought was breathing. Breathing, right? That regulation means, that's what it means. In my opinion, that's what I thought. कि अगर मैं breathe कर सकता हूँ, I can regulate. I did not realize that there was a yes and a no in that itself, right? So the yes part is yes, my nervous system is absolutely connected to my body and my lungs, and thus when I take, okay, when I actually take that breath, it default sends my body into a state of rest. Why? Because when I'm in stress, I am not doing nasal breaths in that capacity. I'm actually doing a more of a stressful breathing, right? जो आपके runners में होती है and all of those things में होती है. However, when I started doing it, what happened was that as soon as I started taking deeper breaths, took place, right? So a lot more anxiety started happening. I started going into palpitations. I was like, what, man? I'm getting more anxious breathing because I thought breathing was regulation. And then I realized, and what I heard was that my body was not used to breathing. Well, technically, my body was not used to safety, right? It was not used to down regulating. What it was used to was up regulation, high expectations, high levels of stress, and being able to be on the go all the time, non-stop, be on the go, be on the go, be on the go, be on the go, right? And that's what it was used to. And that's one of the main reasons why when I started to breathe and my breath and my nervous system really started to shift downwards, my muscle memory kicked in and it actually stopped me from doing it. What it said to me was, not used to this, don't do this. This is not good for you, right? Because what happens for the body is that the body does not know good or bad. The body knows familiar and unfamiliar. And so what happened was that the body actually started to go into an ab reaction because of breathing, which was something that was told to me that har koi karta hai and you should breathe and breathing is the way you should relax. And I was like, did not work for me. Okay. So I went back to Arizona and Dr. Robert, and I was like, you're talking about regulation, but regulation isn't working for me. It actually is creating more discomfort for me. It's actually creating more distress for me. I'm feeling more panicked than I was feeling less panicked. And he said to me that, yes, that's exactly how it works, right? Because in order for my body to shift, right, and develop a new neural pathway, what happens is that it has to recognize that breathing and slowing down is also safe for you. And I was like, it is safe for me, right? Obviously, it's safe for me. Why is it not safe? How am I was like at a 120 key speed. I was telling him, obviously, it's safe. Why isn't it the right answer? Isn't this the right answer? Isn't regulation supposed to be the safe answer? And what he said to me was, again, this thing that I said before to you guys as well. There's a difference between knowing it and doing it. And I was like, what do you mean? Right? Like, you know that breathing and regulating is safe for you technically, but your body is speaking otherwise, right? And what your body is saying is that slowing down and breathing is technically, because of the anxiety that's coming up, unfamiliar and thus unsafe. And thus, in order to develop this skill of congruence and actually being able to down regulate, you have to be able to tolerate, increase your window of tolerance, allow the resources to come up for this thing in particular, so that you can actually create a shift and add a resource which is genuine in terms of breathing. So, can you imagine, in order to actually create a self care toolkit, I had to go through anxiety to be able to genuinely go through it. And I resisted it. And I'll be very honest, I resisted it for a very long time. But then I realized that without me actually coming up with these things or actually working through these things, how can I help my client work through them? Right? So it kind of takes a full circle back into the work that you do on yourself. You can only take a client where you have gone before. Right? So that's one of the reasons why when you add and continue to keep on adding these kind of self-care toolkits, it will make a difference. It will actually add all of those things. And so if you find something that you know might work for you, but when you practice it that it actually doesn't work for you, that's an opportunity, right? And so that's an opportunity for you to grow as a provider, as a practitioner, because whatever challenges that you will face stage by stage, whatever challenges you will face in this process, this you will grow as a person, because you will know, if you're suggesting breathing to someone else and someone comes to you and says, I can't breathe, it's actually creating more anxiety, you've lived through that process, you know exactly what it means, right? And so you're going to have a lot more empathy, and you're going to have a lot more space for the other person as well. And thus, even when they don't do your homework, CBT, like even when they don't do your homework, you will still be able to maintain unconditional positive regard for them, because you know what it is like to not give up, and maintain unconditional positive regard for yourself also, right? And that's one of the main things I want to kind of just really iterate, that when it comes to self-care tools, it's not as clean cut as trying out something that someone else has tried out, and it works. It's really about developing a very active habit. And I'll be very honest, it took me like what, 10 years now. In 10 years now, I have 15 regulation tools, and I have a habit of, again, not by choice, waking up in the morning. I wake up at like 6 to 8 is like my time. 2 hours I give to myself, in which I'm actually reading. I love reading therapy books, right? It's like my thing. Listening to podcasts, I would catch up on something. If I have to go work out, I'll go work out in the morning. My jiu-jitsu classes are like 6:30 to 7:30 in the morning, so that fits my timing particularly as well, right? So it really is something that you have to develop. And if you guys at the start of this 11-week program develop this, right, you will be able to sustain the 11-week program, right? Because if you don't start this now, right, if you're not able to actually make those changes now and feel the resistances and feel the burden of self-awareness and all of those things, what will happen is that when it actually comes to the challenging parts, right, which is the technical parts, the shame parts, the stuff that actually activates. I know we have one a day which is all going to be about grief, right? Why? Because one of the main things that people go through when they go through any kind of transition is grief, right? And one of the main griefs that I had to go through when I was working as the starting of this journey and had to do all of this work because I was being told to do this, was actually the grief of my old life, right? The grief of not being able to have the burden of responsibility, right? So all of these different griefs was the things that I had to kind of go through, and so I did not know much about it, right? So we have a whole day, or at least 2 hours in particular day, given to just learning what are the stages of grief, what are some of the things that it takes to grieve, right, and all of the different elements that are involved in grieving a process, right? And it does not just have to be grieving a person, has to be grieving a life, has to be grieving an expectation कि मेरी MBBS में डिग्री नहीं लगी जिसके वजह से मुझे जो है वो साइकोलॉजी करना पड़ा. Have you grieved it, right? क्योंकि मेरा फॉर एग्जांपल मेरे अपने खुद वुंड्स हैं जिसकी वजह से मैंने जो है वो दूसरों की वुंडिंग को हील करना है. क्या अपने अपने खुद के वुंड्स हील कर ग्रीव करें, right? And the fact that you can't heal someone else, without having gone through that journey, have you grieved that? Right? So all of these things are going to be natural parts of the challenges that you're going to go through when you're going to be in this process. And so my real hope by taking this time today particularly is to be able to really express what does it take to become a therapist, right? It takes a lot of intentionality, right? You have to have the intentionality that this is the job you wanted to do. If this is not the job you wanted to do, there are a lot more easier, safer, less exhausting jobs available. And I'm sure everyone listening is quite competent and quite ready and quite available. And मतलब आपको कोई और job मिल जाएगी, right? And Dr. Robert asked me, like, and he said to me very honestly, and there's a reason why I'm referencing him, because he's one of the mentors that has really helped me figure it out कि यार अच्छा, in order to do this job you have to want to be someone who knows what their own personal boundaries are. You have to be self aware. You have to work on your muscle memories and change them because of the requirement that is there to self care. There was an example I give to the people who work at the center. When a surgeon goes for surgery, they do this whole ritual of self care. वो अपना हाथ धोते हैं, वो अपने gloves पहनते हैं, वो sterilize करते हैं, वो एक certain mindset के अंदर आते हैं. Then when they go in with the certainty of I prepped myself for therapy. As a practitioner, this is the mindset that we need to have, that we've prepped ourselves, that we're not doing this just because there's an unmet need in us that needs to kind of that is leading the way. We're doing this because it's the intention that we've set for ourselves, that this is the work that we want to do. And when we are leading with that intentionality, only then will we do the work to manage the burnout, to do the therapy, to do the supervision, to do the kharcha, and to do all of that work. And it's absolutely okay to say, thank God someone told me this before. Otherwise, if I had to find this out after I had paid for my master's degree, which a lot of people find out after that they've paid for their master's degree, they're like, oh my God, yeah. Right? So it is very common for people to kind of find this out much later. I found this out much later in my degree, that I had to sort myself out in order to help other people. I was like, oh my God, what a journey that starts, right? So this is all the stuff that we've kind of worked with. I also want to share some regulation tools that have worked for me, and the intention for doing that is just to share with you how I came about this, right? And so that you guys can really have a variety of different regulation tools as well, that can actually support you, and it's not limited by one particular thing, right? So for example, um, coloring is one of my main ones for emotional intensity. Whenever there's emotional intensity and I can't express it, and there's anger or fear or sometimes sadness, but I have other tools for sadness also. But if I have anger particularly or fear, what I do is I took a paper, right, and I took a crayon, and I like crayons more than markers because crayons are a little bit more like they have a little bit more heavy. I have a heavy hand. I can actually kind of press, so I can really feel that intensity, right? And I really kind of do it. One of the main things I have to be mindful for is that I have to have the intention of changing the color, right? So what that means is that if I'm actively using the crayon, right, I have to be in touch with my body, that as soon as I start feeling that the color is complete, I'll change the color, and the other color is always another feeling, because feelings do transition, right? So anytime you have another experience and all of those things, do try to have that kind of experience for yourself also, right? So it really helps you guys as well in that transition process for emotions and all of those aspects of it. Number one, right? As you can mention, as you can see, this is a tool particularly for a particular moment, right? So yani ke your my emotional regulation tool is one of them is coloring crayons, right? Because it helps me release some of the intense emotions that are there. When I'm in my emotion situations of emotional numbing, right? That means that I have, and this is a good one particularly. So, for example, if I've toasted my emotions, right? What that means is I've been in enough emotionally charged situations that I actually can't emote anymore, and I'm feeling emotionally burnt out or exhausted. what I like to do is I like to intellectually engage, right? So I would read something, right? So I would read a particular passage, or I would kind of start to involve myself, and I would do it morely about the craft. Therapy, some of the books I would highly recommend people start to buy and read in PDF, you can, is Gift of Therapy, Love's Executioner, becoming a person, right? Person centered की जो humanistic books है, man, read. And again, reading was also one of the hard ones, that because what happens is that when I'm emotionally burned, I don't want to put myself to actively take out more emotions. When I start intellectually engaging on something, that's when I actually kind of make a difference, right? So those are some of the elements that are there. For me, particularly on a somatic level, I have jujitsu, which also gives me community, right? Because that's one of the main things I have for community. Because if I don't go actively to my community work, which is jujitsu and all of those things, what happens is isolation, loneliness, all of those things set in, right? So when you're going to the gym, that's still a more active. But if you have a cycling group, if you have a friends group, if you have all of those elements, community is huge when it comes to that. TRE, right? TRE is a somatic tool. It's everyone can kind of do it on their own as well. Highly recommend you doing with a provider first, right? And so tension and trauma release exercise is a way my body less learns how to shake, right? So actually just kind of moving. As you can see, I've been sitting, I've been talking consistently for an hour and a half. So just kind of having a nice little shake, loosening up my body, and obviously shaking itself. But for me particularly, TRE is something that we're going to do, and I know TRE is one of the things. Hopefully, we're going to do in the last session as well, right? So we're going to actively do a somatic training, somatic therapy also. Though that's going to be one of the nice tools, and I'll hopefully try to show you guys about TRE also, right? So those are all the different elements that we're going to be kind of covering. I really hope. I know this one, but this particular one, because of the technical aspects of things and all these different elements, or technical issues and stuff, we were able to kind of not start on time. But I'm hoping that this really kind of gave the foundation of the start of what it takes to become, to have a therapy, to be a therapist. What does it take to sustain your career as a therapist, right? And what are some of the challenges that you're going to come into as you're going to be continuing to work? My real intention with these weekly 11-week programs, right? And I'll be very honest about sort of like some of the feedbacks that I've gotten as well regarding all of those things, right? Like, this used to be a therapist training program, used to be a paid training that we used to do at the center. It used to be again a 22-week program. It shifted into a 16-week program and all of those elements into it. My intention to do 11-week program primarily is because in 11 weeks we cover all the technical knowledge, right? जो उस 22 weeks के अंदर हम लोग करते थे, या हम लोग जो 16 weeks के अंदर किया था, उसमें यही 11 weeks का पूरा content tha. So all the content now, my intention is to make it available for people, right? It will be available for people online, via these live sessions weekly. Once these live sessions are over, we will be removing them from YouTube, and they will be available on Zoom. So those people who have purchased the Zoom option, right? You can have these recordings for life, and so we will be having these recordings available for them. So that's an option that's available for people, right? However, at least one of the main intentions behind doing this for people, and at least giving people sort of like the opportunity to actually see this training, be involved in it. It's available for free now as well, and all the 6 sessions, all the 11 sessions would be available for free also, is because this is what it takes, right? Like, I'm at this stage, I'm hoping the where I we need more therapists. Very factually, we need more therapists who are congruent, who know why they did become a therapist, right? Who have decided that this is a work that they have intentionally chosen to do, and it's not something that's healing that they're doing for themselves, or it's not something which is a step down from what they really wanted to do. There are a lot of people, in particularly in Karachi, in Pakistan, that are rightfully so, man. Like Karachi, right? Third world country, wounded. We live in an adverse society, and thus our experiences of upbringing are adverse, very much so, right? And so it's very important that we have Hopefully one day we'll have a licensing board, but until the fact that we have a licensing board, I believe that this should be open information, right? And I do want to end or disclose a few things before ending properly. Is all of the things that will be shared in the trainings, the resources. We have a self-care tool. We'll create a drive for the people who are opting for the recording as well, ताकि you have the resources available for this, so that you can continue to upkeep for yourself, right? That you can continue to add all of those elements into it. The intention primarily is that when you will be receiving all of this information, I hope this becomes your baseline, right? I really hope that when you're starting your career as a therapist, or have already become a therapist, or have completed your degrees or your trainings, I really hope that the information that you get in this therapist training program gives you this baseline. Okay, our humanistic, CBT, TA, Gestalt, right? Psychodynamic, grief work, somatic work, at least in practical, at least not in practical, but like in more of a, like मुझे पता है कि असली प्रैक्टिस के अंदर, थेरेप्यूटिक वर्क के अंदर, इन चीज़ों के साथ, इनकी एप्लीकेशंस के साथ क्या चैलेंजेस आते हैं, क्या सक्सेसेस होते हैं, कब ये असली में काम करते हैं, कब ये काम नहीं करते, right? And this is only coming in from my own personal experiences. The personal experience I have for 10 years as a clinical supervisor, as running a center, as training the training. So take it with that grain of salt. Okay, so have that desire कि आपको यहाँ से और इस ट्रेनिंग से कोई ऐसी चीज़ें दिखती हैं जो आपको लगता है कि यार, आई डोंट एग्री, this guy is too trauma informed, non-pathological, he doesn't agree with the DSM. That's not who I am. I have no issues with that. My issue is not that at all. My issue is you do your best version. That's it. You do your best version. Your work shows, like your work shows that आप फायदा कर रहे हो clinical practice में अपने, great. This is just my small step, hopefully, in contributing to your journey, right? And I'm really hoping that the bigger steps you guys will take as you guys continue to go along, right? So we would be ending today's session. Primarily, I know we have a little bit of a time gap and all of those elements for it, but my real hope was that I would be able to kind of give you guys a little bit of an introduction and all of the set those things up for you guys. That was the main hope. Give you guys a little bit of a basics about the beginning of the therapeutic journey. What does that really kind of give? What will it take for your career as well, to grow? And finally, burnout and compassion fatigue. I really hope you guys enjoyed this process. I'll be here back again live, hopefully on Friday, right? This time with less technical difficulties because we have this thing going on now. So, but this time with less technical difficulties and no personal life emergencies taking place as well. And I'm looking forward to seeing you guys on Friday now. Take care, guys. Have fun.